was said earlier, my name's Stuart Sommerville, and I was asked to come here today to talk a bit about our farm and some various things on it. I'll put a couple of disclaimers out there in front. The first is that I can't say we have an amazing, innovative farm with laser beams that sort our cattle into pens and barns heated by collecting the methane from farts and things like that. I think we have a fairly run-of-the-mill operation. Some of the things that we do, people might think are wrong. Some things people might think are kind of interesting and right. I'm just here to talk about it. The second thing is I'm going to apologize right now because my father asked if he could come today, if that was all right with me, and I said yes, not thinking that it was going to be the most terrifying thing ever to stand up and talk about our farm with my father in the room. So if I start stuttering or looking scared, I apologize right now. Our family farm is located in Indiang, and I put a little dot up there on the map so people can find it, because most people end up in Indiang by accident when they're trying to find their way to Saskatchewan. If you've had the misfortune ever to get there, you'll know it because there's not much around. Put this up there. Our farm was homesteaded by my great-grandfather in the early 1900s. He's in the middle and my grandfather's up above. And because I wanted to kind of establish that my cowboy roots, and that picture on the far left is my other great-grandfather, my mother's great-grandfather, so we've got some time working in the beef industry in the family. So now a bit more about the farm. We're a mixed operation, but I just think it would be fair to say that the cow-calf side makes up the majority of what we do. We have about 200 head of main Anjou cows. We don't do anything particularly special in our management, but I think it's important to say that our management and our practices have been built on year by year and generation by generation. So what we're doing now has just been built on what's been done over the past 100 years. Some things have been abandoned, some things have been changed, but I think all of it's valuable and it's helped us get through to today. Just basic rundown of our year. We wean in late November, early December, and then we feed those calves until spring. Then we make a decision what to do with them around then. We do different things each year. Usually we do go through our calving. I put a nice picture like this. We calve in April and May for the most part because the weather's a little bit nicer then than it is at some times a year. We don't have to deal with 30 below too much. I picked this picture because it made me feel better that there weren't 3 feet of snow in the calving yard at that time. Sometimes we have to deal with that, just like everybody does. But we feel that it's a system that's worked pretty well for us. This is just a picture of our breeding heifers from this year. Our new breeding heifers and our replacement heifers each year are just selected from our own herd. I can't remember ever buying new heifers, although I know it's been done in the past. And it's kind of a management thing that we've changed over time. At one time, we would have looked at all of our heifers in the spring when we traditionally sold our calves after the winter. We would have selected 30 or 40 animals from there that we thought were going to be good cows in the future, and we'd turn them out with a bull and see what we got come the next fall. We found that sometimes those 30 or 40 beautiful heifers that we picked out in the spring turned out to not be in calf. So what we started doing was we would just turn out the whole lot of them with a couple of bulls. And instead of selecting for appearances, we were selecting for fertility, and I think that's done us a lot of good. It was kind of a change, and we felt awkward doing it sometimes, but we find that the heifers that are in calf, and a lot more than you'd expect sometimes do get in calf, are the better heifers in the end. Another thing that we do on our farm is most of our bulls are bulls that we've retained from our own herd. Every so often we go out and buy one, but new bull from a bull sale is often expensive. And you get a nice looking bull that's just come off of a lot of feed, and you don't necessarily know what you're going to have down the road. We don't get too many surprises with our bulls because they're raised up from calves that we know ourselves. So we know their breeding, we know their mothers, we know their temperament. We kind of keep some evenness in our herd, and we're happy about that. Just another picture of our bulls. These are actually yearling bulls. Up there, so you know they look pretty good. These were guys that we were happy that we've kept so far. Other enterprises, I've just asked a bunch of things to give the background, and I'll go into some other stuff. Other enterprises that we have on the farm is we do grow our own hay And we do some grain. We have about 500 acres, 400 to 500 acres of cropland. We do wheat and barley and canola. Every now and then we grow some oats. I think in our part of the world, though, unlike other areas, it's kind of a no-brainer to always keep cattle, as well as having the cultivated land. We're not the most productive land in the province. It can be a little rough out there. It seems like more often than you get a crop, you get hailed out or droughted out or grasshoppered out or flooded out or something going wrong. But it is nice to have them both on the side, and we get side benefits from having the cropland, of course. All right, I'll leave this picture up for a while because it's prettier than I am. And I'm going to answer some of the questions that I was given for this. So one of the questions I was asked to speak on was, why did I choose the cow-calf business as a career? And I guess the simplest answer to that is because we were already doing it. I didn't have to come up with this idea to do cow-calf, do a cow-calf operation, but I guess there's a lot of other things to throw in there as well. I have worked off farm. I went to Edmonton for university. I lived there for a while. I realized I didn't want to live in the city very badly. I came home and I was living on the farm, and I was working part-time on the farm, and I was teaching. I was teaching in Delia, and then I taught in Hannah for a while. And I had those experiences, and I found that I couldn't do a good job of all the things I was trying to juggle. And I think people who had off-farm jobs, that's a common experience. It's hard to do a good job of everything when you're split so many different ways. And so one reason I decided to come back and do this was just because I felt I needed to focus on one thing and do the job well. There's other reasons, though, too. Personally, I find the rhythm of a cow-calf operation really satisfying. I like how you can get into a rhythm over the year. I like working outside in beautiful country, and sometimes, even when it's a sideways blizzard outside, when you're driving down the road feeding cattle, you have to admit it is still kind of pretty out there, and you're pretty lucky to get to see some of that stuff. Another reason that I like it, why it's appealing to me, is I feel like I have a lot of control over what I get to do, and I feel like our family has a lot of control over our business. I think in some ways I feel it's control that maybe you wouldn't even have if you were in another sector of the beef industry, if you were, say, a feeder. There's kind of a limited number of things you can do as a feeder. And I feel like a cow-calf operation, we can get a lot more creative. We can change things as we see fit. There's lots of experiments that we can try. And I just liked having that option there. Now, I was also asked to talk about specifically what was the biggest success that we've had on our farm. And I think that our biggest success, and I don't know how much credit I can really take for it, is that we survived. We went through a lot of tough times. Our family, like some families, experienced some problems with farm transfer and succession, and that was a hit. We survived the droughts of the early 2000s. In my mind, Alberta is in a permanent drought because that's what I felt like I grew up with. And we survived BSE. You know, personally, I remember I was in grade 12. I had just finished high school, and I was listening to the radio when the announcement came on that an animal with BSE had been found in Canada. And I was listening to that announcement thinking that, well, I guess that writes off my future as a beef farmer, and maybe I better pay more attention to some of that university stuff than I would have otherwise. As it turned out, we got through that. You know, I'll always give lots of credit to my father. I think he made a lot of difficult decisions at that time. Through the drought years and through BSE, a lot of people did give up. It would have been easy to give up. Probably from his point of view, he might have had an easier life if he had given up in some cases. But there's something, I think, when you have a farm that's been in the family for so many generations, you feel a bit of a duty of care to the generations that came before. You owe it a little bit to them to try, because they got through tough times. The farm survived the Depression, and it survived absence of family during the war and things like that. And I think it gives you a push to carry on. During BSE and the drought, we kept everything we could. I think that was a really important thing in our farm, because it meant that we've just constantly built up our herd. And that's actually affected our management practices, which was one of the next questions I was asked to speak on. One thing we do in our management that maybe some people would think is strange, and some people might think is a bad idea, is we don't cull our cows as harshly as people in other operations might. So when you bring in cows in the fall and you preg check them, we don't necessarily cull an animal because she's open. An animal who's 5 years old and maybe had a few good calves in that time, but who comes up open in the fall is still a good animal, and she can still go on to give you other good calves. And it's cheaper to feed her through winter, because you really don't notice one more cow out there in the herd that much than it is to go out and buy a new cow for the next year. I think that it means that we have some older animals in our herd than some people might like to see, but they're good cows, they raise good calves, and I think that's an important consideration. So instead of looking at whether or not an animal's in calf when it comes time to cull, more important considerations for us would be things like what's her condition in the fall, and if she seems to be failing year over year, or if she has bad feet, things like that become a more important consideration. Other things we look at are, we look at her calving history. A cow you might show up in your books that she's had a calf every year, and that might seem like an awfully good thing, but you might go back in your looks too and find out that every year that calf died of scours, or every year that calf had a slow start, things like that. So those start being our additional considerations down the road rather than just flat out fertility in the fall. I would say that with current opportunities that we see right now, we haven't changed an awful lot of how we run things on our farm or things that we do different. I'd say maybe the biggest change is just seeing how things in agriculture in general have been going over the past few years. I think there's a general trend of improvement in agriculture. I gave up my off-farm job, which was a big decision for us because I had a good income. It was steady. I had benefits. I knew what to depend on. I have a wife and a 1-year-old son. I have to support them. And to give that up to go into agriculture is a scary thing to do, but I kind of feel like it's taking advantage of how good things are right now. One thing we did do, and we change it up all the time, is we changed how we marketed our steers. And we've changed how we've marketed our steers a little bit each year, I'd say, since BSE hit. When BSE came, we started fattening our steers ourselves in our feedlot. And we did that for a few years. We fattened them in the feedlot, and we'd call up one of the packers, and they'd send out a buyer to come and look at them, and that's how we marketed our animals. There's other years where we turned our steers out on grass, and we grassed them through the summer and sold them in the fall. This year, we were going into the spring, looking like we'd have a shortage of grass, and we chose to keep them on grain in that time. We ended up selling them as heavy feeders here in the fall, as much as anything because we needed the space for our next calves to go into the feedlot. But I feel that adaptability, or the adaptability we've given ourselves to change each year and make those decisions on a year-by-year basis, as opposed to saying that this is how we do it and we're going to keep doing it that way, I think that's an important thing that's kind of helped with our success so far. The potential's there to get burned. It always is, but we're not taking as big a risk as we could in other ways, saying we're going to do it the same way all the time. Do I have another interesting picture up there? No. I'll go to that one in a minute. I was also asked how the current situation is going to shape our future. I think probably the most important way it's going to shape our future is, as a mixed operation, we always kind of run the balance between growing grain and raising cattle. And sometimes we've been more grain, sometimes we've been more cattle. In recent history, it looked like it would have been a smart idea for us to get out a breaking disc and break an awful lot of that old pasture and seed it down to crop. We didn't. Some of our fields need to be rotated, it's true, and we're going to do that, but we're probably going to put more of our focus on the cow-calf side of our operation. It looks like it's got a strong future for a while down the road. We're going to continue to have the mixed side of our operation here, but our focus is going to be on the cattle themselves. And like I said, again, it fits into this question. The current situation has just convinced me that it's an excellent time to focus solely on agriculture. And if that's a luxury that you have available to you, to work on the one job and work on it well, now's the time to do it. There's a lot of people There's a lot of people who maybe are looking at prices right now saying, the prices are high, I should just sell out while the prices are high, and then I'm set up for a few years down the road rather than waiting until everything crashes and selling. And I think that something like that would be a short-sighted decision. It's better to hold on to it because now's the time to grow and make things better for the future. We finally maybe have a bit of money to work with, and I think all of us need to keep that in mind if we're sitting on the fence about what our future should be. I was also asked about hurdles, what hurdles we face or what our single biggest hurdle is on the farm. I don't really have anything creative or groundbreaking to say with that. Probably the biggest point is that, or the biggest hurdle that we face is just money. And I think that's the way it's always going to be. And that's the way it is for most businesses. Your biggest hurdle is going to be money. Where to get it, what to spend it on, how to spread it around. That's just the biggest challenge. I don't think that's ever been different in farming. Probably in the past 500 years, every farmer out there would have said their biggest challenge was money. And it's going to be that way for the next 500 years. You know, it would be really tempting right now to, when we see things are good too, to make some really bold decisions. You can go out and buy 200 head of heifers. Sounds kind of nice sometimes to have 200 more heifers around and have 200 more calves come the next spring, but we have to be careful. It would be possible to take too bold of a step and overstep what you can handle, and you're not doing yourself much good if you've driven yourself into the ground trying to be brave with the money. Another simple one for a problem is labor too. Labor is a bit of a hurdle for us now that we're depending on family labor to get us through, and that's pretty good most of the time, but you can always have more help, and you can always get more things done. If we needed help in the future, if we needed to hire help, it's a little unsure where that help would come from. It's not like times in the past when you had lots of families around with teenage sons who were happy to go work somewhere else for a while. We don't have that situation anymore. The population in rural areas has decreased. Just the price of labor itself has increased. A lot of people would prefer to go off and work in other fields, or they just don't want to have to travel as far as they would have to come work for us. So labor is less important than money, but it is a hurdle nonetheless. One of the last questions I was asked was what keeps me up at night. And this is why I have this picture here. These people are who keep me up at night for good reasons. This is my family, my wife and my son, and the stuff that keeps me up at night is them, because there are things that have to do with them that I can't manage. When it comes to things like drought or prices or money or labor, that's stuff you can manage your way out of. If you're smart, you can get help, you can ask for things, but I can't make a hospital appear closer than it already is if a health problem comes up. I can't make good schools appear where there are none. Our local school has 20 students right now. It's kindergarten to grade 9 school, and it's always kind of unsure if that school is going to be there 4 years down the road when he starts attending classes. So things like that end up worrying more than anything. We can talk a lot about business, but I think kind of the human and family side of a cow-calf operation is really, really important to consider. I can say a few years ago, my wife and I had a scare. She ended up losing a lot of blood. She ended up in the local hospital. I kind of think the local hospital just wasn't able to help her that much. She ended up getting shipped down to the next hospital, and that's not a very comforting thing to have happen when you realize that if something went well and truly wrong while you're sitting at home, you probably couldn't do much about that, and they couldn't get out there in time to help you. A lot of us who are on farms are far away from the services that are out there. If a fire happens, we don't necessarily have anyone we can depend on to call. We've learned recently that fire departments are only helpful if they show up, or if the 911 operator can figure out what you're talking about, because the 911 operator doesn't understand the direction that, well, it's the thing on fire across from town. They want specifics that you can't give them. But that's a real concern when I'm considering that my choice and my desire to work in the family business, to be on the farm that my family's been on for 100 years, can put them at risk. And that's a scary thing. On a less scary note, things that keep me up at night, is probably my own decisions. And it's my own decisions in the past. I worry a lot less about what's coming up in the future as opposed to what I've already done. Because every single thing that I end up doing on the farm, I find I end up second guessing. I hope that I did the right thing. I hope that I got out to that heifer as fast as I could, that I didn't leave her too long and she was having trouble calving. That's something that weighs on my mind all the time, because if I'm going to do a job, I want to do it well. I think that's a common problem for farmers. I think we often feel we could have done a little bit better in the past, and we try to keep that idea in our head that going forward we want to keep doing better. We can rag ourselves down a lot, but my wife reminds me all the time that some stuff you just can't help. I shouldn't beat myself up if I didn't get all the hay up because it started raining. I didn't make it rain. I was trying my best as I could to get it up, but still, some things are just out of your hands. And it's a worry. It weighs on my mind, but it is what it is. I guess the last question I was asked to answer here was, I was just asked about what's exciting. I think lots is exciting right now. For the first time in my life, I would have told you a few years ago that, yeah, I wanted to farm, but I really didn't expect to ever have anything nice. I expected it always to be hand to mouth. And things are starting to look like maybe it won't always be that way. Maybe some things are going to straighten out. And there's going to be ups and downs for sure, but there seems to be kind of a steady improvement in agriculture around the world. And another thing I want to point out that I feel is exciting, and some people might disagree with me, but I think it's really exciting that the people in urban communities around the world right now have so much interest in their food and how it's produced. Now, sometimes they can drive you absolutely wild with the stuff that they think is going on or things that they want you to do. But at the same time, those are the people who drive policy, and they put value on what you're doing. They might have opinions about how you're doing it, but they value what you do. And it's really nice to feel like what you do is valued by society. When I went to university, I was up in Edmonton. People would ask me, well, what do you do? I'd say, well, I'm in school, but I come from a farm. And I felt like people looked down their nose at me when they found out I was from a farm. I don't feel that way anymore when I go to the city and talk to people about what I do. Might disagree with them on some things, but in general, they're interested because they hear that I'm from a farm and that I keep cattle, and that's exotic to them. That's exotic and interesting, and they want to hear about it, and they want to learn about it, and they want your opinion on things. And I think that's a really good thing for all of us, because now we're not having to shout to get our voices heard when we talk about agriculture. People are coming and asking us about it. All right? It's important to take that opportunity as a positive thing, and to go out there and just talk to people about what you do and some of the challenges that you have and some of the successes that you have. It's a shame that we couldn't get a busload of people from Calgary and bring them to a room like this and drop them off and have them just go around the room and ask questions and to listen to this stuff, because they'd probably learn a lot and it would probably do the entire industry a lot of good. This is my last slide. I just want to say a quick thank you, and if anyone was interested in contacting me, that's up there. One thing I did put up was my Twitter handle. If you had asked me a year ago if I thought Twitter was a good thing, I would have said all sorts of terrible things about it, because I thought it was just a waste of time, and it was a bunch of people taking pictures of their breakfast and sharing those pictures with one another, and I had no value in that. But I've learned that Twitter is a really great tool to connect with farmers all over the world. So in the past year, I've started communicating with farmers in Europe, in South Africa, and in the States, and Australia, and South America, all over the place. I've learned a lot. I'm just getting to watch what they do, and I get to share what I do, and I have a lot of fun with it. I mostly just put up pictures of what I do day to day on Twitter. I think it's a lot of fun. Now my wife also doesn't just have to listen to me list all the interesting things I saw in a day, and I get to bore the rest of the world with it a little bit. So if you're interested, that's up there. I'm always happy to answer questions. Sometimes I sound a bit more intelligent when I'm writing, because I don't stumble over myself as much then. One last plug I wanted to put in. It was actually how I ended up speaking at this. I'm with a program called the Cattlemen's Young Leaders Program. It's run by the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and it's for producers, well, people involved in the beef industry who are 18 to 35 years old. If you are in that group or know someone, you might want to let them know about this. It's a really great opportunity to network with people across the country. You get matched up with a mentor who, to varying degrees, sometimes it can be hard to meet with your mentor, but they can help you find places to learn things. They can help line you up with information. Sometimes they can just provide you with a different perspective than talking to your parents or your relatives and your neighbors about how things ought to be done in the beef industry. There's also all sorts of opportunities that are opened up from it. Myself, through the Cattlemen's Young Leaders Program, I went to Texas in October to attend the 5 Nations Beef Alliance meetings that were held down there. I got to meet people from all over the world, actually, and people who I just couldn't imagine sitting down at a table with in ordinary circumstances. You know, through that program, I had the opportunity to sit down to lunch with the president of the NCBA in the States and with leaders from pharmaceutical companies and the packing industry and all sorts of opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise. I think that as farmers, sometimes we can get a little isolated, and it's important to put ourselves into opportunities where we can learn things like this, or if you can apply to a program like the CYL program. Again, it's just an opportunity to increase your knowledge, learn new things, and get out there and see the world a little bit. Does anyone have any questions? That's probably a fair observation. The more you hold on to, the more risk you hold on to, too. Which was an or something we considered with our calves this year, for example. So we could have held on to them right until they were fat and sold them as fat calves. Probably could have made a little more money. We also would have held on to a little more risk. And then there's labor and time that goes into it. But I think that in general, the more you hold on to things, the better it pays off. If you sell a heifer who you could have bred and got a calf from yourself, you've just passed that on to someone else. So you can kind of retain some money. I think it's a good thing. Yes, sir. You mean the CCA? Yeah. Well, the CCA is working with programs like the Canadian Roundtable on Sustainable Beef, which is working with industry, and is starting to get some of that stuff out there.
Like right to our MLAs?
Yeah, well, the CCA does do lobbying as well, so they communicate with MLAs, MPs. You'd be far better off talking to a CCA rep about some of that stuff. But I think it's going to take a long time to convince people in urban areas that a lot of what we're doing is good. I think sometimes we're going to have to swallow our pride and admit that not everything they say is stupid. Sometimes it feels that way, but they're allowed to have an opinion. And maybe we should listen to them because they are consumers, and we've got to meet them halfway. So instead of just shutting our brains off when they start talking, and it can be really tempting sometimes to listen to what they have to say. And I think a lot of efforts like the Canadian Roundtable on Sustainable Beef are going to be a good starting point for getting halfway between. We can communicate with the buyers, and they can communicate with us. I think that we're going to make some headway that way.